Everyone talks about how great Beethoven was. Beethoven wasn't so great.
What do you mean Beethoven wasn't so great?
He never got his picture on bubblegum cards, did he? Have you ever seen his picture on a bubblegum card? How can you say someone is great who's never had his picture on bubblegum cards?
Good grief.
And the home of the brave.
Game on!
Welcome to episode 44 of the Hit the Deck podcast, where we talk deck hockey, street hockey, ball hockey. It's hockey in sneakers. Oh, to quote a friend of mine, oh, doctor. We have got quite the show lined up for you this podcast. We have some special guests that we've invited onto the show, don't we, James?
Yes, we do. Some returning, wonderful, familiar guests, too, as a matter of fact.
And if you would like to know who those guests are, well, you're just going to have to stick with us, aren't you? All right. Well, how are you, James? I didn't ask. That was rude of me. How are you, sir?
That wasn't rude at all.
No, I am a rude person, and I apologize.
No need, please. You are one of the nicest, kindest, greatest gentlemen on the planet, and I'm doing fine, thank you. How are you holding up?
I can't complain. I'm doing all right. I am happy. I'm happy to be doing another show with you. Things have been a little hectic lately at work and elsewhere, but otherwise, that's otherwise business as usual. And I enjoy doing this podcast. It's definitely one of the highlights of my week. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that, and I thank you, our listener, for giving me a reason to do that. So here we are. And
the real credit belongs to you, Gary. So we'll move on, but thank you.
Yeah, all right, whatever. So, you know what? We have a pretty packed show tonight, so why don't we just jump into the starting lineup for this evening, yeah? And for tonight's starting lineup, in goal, as ever, I am number 35, your American Rhino, Gary McComiskey, and of course, my stalwart co-host,
Number 4 on defense, I'm James Sajazi, and tonight we have two special guests returning to the podcast, leading off with
Brad Vonsky, number 44 at forward.
And number 32, Mike Margiotta at goaltender, but also whatever is needed at game day.
All right, thanks, guys. Welcome back, I should say.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, sure. You've both been on multiple podcasts by dint of your lengthy interviews, and we appreciate both of your previous, or I should say, all of your previous shows were highlights, I think, of our shows so far. So having you back is a bit of a thrill for. Well, I speak only for myself, but I shouldn't speak for
both of us.
Absolutely, yeah. All right. Nevertheless, we're happy to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us back.
Yeah, no doubt.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for having us here.
Is that something that people still say? No doubt. I say no doubt as kind of like a learned, educated thing, but I know that for a time, no doubt was like, yeah, no doubt, like that. That's I know nothing about pop culture, so I just, James, save me, please, just tell me what's on deck for this show, please.
It's a real quick one, I promise you.
All right.
It's just one thing, actually. The 100 Greatest NHL Players Roundtable. The complete list of the 100 greatest NHL players was officially announced during last week's All-Star Weekend festivities. LIQ members Brad and Mike join us as we go over the list and give our own top 10s, especially if some of our favorite players didn't make the cut. And that's what's on deck.
Thank you, James, and thank you for getting me back on track. So, shall we continue?
Okay, anyway. Speaking of history, the gentlemen Brad and Mike are here for a very special occasion. We are going to dissect the 100 greatest NHL players list that was announced at the recording of this podcast last weekend during the NHL All-Star weekend. So Gary and Brad actually came up with a pretty good idea that Brad will give us a top 10 of the list that he thinks out of the 100 greatest players, since it's not that long a podcast, so we can't go over the 100. And then Mike and I and Gary will throw in our 2 cents as to what we think players should have been on or players that haven't been on. But before we get into Brad's top 10, speaking of which, the 100 list proper itself is pretty interesting. And obviously a lot of famous names made it, like Gretzky and Howe and Bossy, to name a few. But for the most part, I think they did a good job, the NHL did, in naming the 100 greatest players of all time in celebration of the 100th anniversary of the NHL. So, again, we'll go into who we think maybe shouldn't be on the list. It's a pretty amazing thing to narrow it down to just 100 players out of the league's great, rich history. So if you wouldn't mind, Brad, just kicking it off with your top 10 of the guys that you think, even if they're the same names as on the list itself. And I'm really happy that they didn't put it in number order, by the way, like who's number 1, 2, 3, and whatever. They just have the 100 greatest players in alphabetical order, and we could fight among ourselves who the best of that is. So, Brad, please take it away if you don't mind.
Sure. And normally people usually count down with these things, but I think because it's such a given with the NHL, I think I'll just start at number 1.
All right.
Wayne Gretzky at number 1. I think just about everybody can agree on that one.
Consensus pick.
Yeah, definitely.
Probably, yeah. That's pretty safe assumption.
Although I know I'm not trying to jump on you, Brad, but I did read in one article that Gretzky, Lemieux, and Orr all named Gordie Howe as their number 1 player of all time.
Very funny you should say that, Gary.
Because he died. Like, were they going to say, oh, he was great, but he's dead, but he's not as good as we would like?
Well, I expect Gretzky to say, well, obviously it was me. Because, that's what athletes do.
No, I wasn't expecting that, but, I mean, I don't know. I get that all 3 said it, but it's sort of like, all right, did you really mean it? Or you just because, oh, he's dead, everyone's sad still?
No,
I think
number
one.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with the humility of these great players. And Gretzky is the most humble of them all, especially I'm a huge Gretzky fan. If people haven't heard that in the past, I admit it. But the humility of these players, and I think they always credit the history and the guys that came before them. And exactly right. I mean, Lemieux and Gretzky, they'd never be that, I don't know, whatever the case is, selfish, I suppose, to say that, yeah, I'm the best. It's not like Muhammad Ali or Michael Jordan or anybody else that's kind of breaking his arm to pat himself on the back. NHL players don't do that. So I'm sure maybe the fact that Mr. Howe passed away had maybe a little bit to do with it, but I guarantee you those guys were being incredibly honest, saying that Howe was their favorite. But yeah, for our generation at least, or statistically, you can't go wrong with the number 99 at number 1. So if you wouldn't mind
Brad,
moving on to...
why was it funny that I mentioned Gordie Howe?
It was quite funny because at number 2, I have Gordie Howe.
The heck you say?
Yes. And I think part of why Gretzky and Orr and Lemieux said that is probably because Howe played for so long that all of these guys grew up watching him. So
that's true.
They still look up to him as that hero of theirs. So that's probably why, considering the man played he played in the NHL from 46 to 1980. That's incredible.
That is obscene in some ways.
Yeah.
That's actually a great...
Well, that wasn't all NHL. There was some WHA.
There was some WHA Whalers years in there, but still, the man was playing pro hockey for a while. Which
may have been worse for him, considering, from what we understand, those games were fairly violent.
Yeah.
But that's a great point about them all watching him growing up. I never would have thought of that. And upon reflection, I think you're absolutely right.
So who's in the third spot?
All right, third spot, and I'm going to probably just go through these now because we can sit here and talk all day on these things.
And probably will.
Number 3, Bobby Orr. Number 4, Mario Lemieux. Number 5, the great Jean Beliveau. Number 6, Maurice Rocket Richard. Number 7, Ray Bourque. Number 8, Boston Bruin great, old-time hockey, Eddie Shore. Number 9, Mike Bossy. And number 10, Jaromir Jagr.
Wow.
Which might be a controversial pick there.
Okay.
Number 10.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd say it's that controversial.
Yeah, I mean, the guy's still going strong and rewriting the record book, so pretty impressive.
I'm not going to argue the pick, but I am a little surprised.
There was one other player I was toying with, Bossy, Jagr, and Marc Messier. They were the 3 that I had at the end there, and Messier got left off.
Well, I don't disagree with that, actually, and especially Mike Bossy, one of the all-time best scorers in history, and unfortunately he had such a brief career, but he was, didn't he set a record for 9 consecutive years, 40 goals or something like that? Nobody else has ever done that?
9 consecutive, and if you look at the stats, it's incredible. 750 games in his career, over 1,100 points.
Wow.
So that's a heck of an average there.
It was 50 goals, James. 9 years, 50 goals. I just saw that researching for this list. That's why I know.
Wow. Even more impressive. So that's not even including his 4 Stanley Cups and 5 in a row, getting to the finals and all those playoff heroics. So that's mighty impressive. But, hey, man, listen, I guess the whole point of the fact that they didn't list the 100 greatest players, which I believe they did back in 99-2000 with the turn of the century, because everybody was obsessed with lists at that time. But this go-around, they were smart enough to just hold it to 100 names, which is honor enough. So thank you so much for getting us a starting point, Brad, for that. And leading things off, Mike, anybody on both Brad and the 100 list, any player or players on that list that you think should not be on that list?
On Brad's list, definitely not.
100.
On the 100 list? Yeah, definitely. Taze, take him out. Kane, I would take out. Keith, I'd probably take him out. The other issue I have with the 100 list is you do have some of these guys that played way back in like the 30s, and I understand that they were pioneers and helped shape the game, but I do wonder if you were to, jump in the DeLorean, go back, pick them up, and then bring them to a game here, how they would fare, because, it was much more relaxed rules, so they could be more physical because, it was okay to elbow a guy in the face because that's just what you did back then. But I would kind of be a little curious to see how they would handle the more refined and speed-oriented aspect of the game.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, exactly. And again, like what we were saying before about the pioneers and players before them, but let's say, I love the DeLorean reference, so thank you very much for that. At the time, those guys, when they played, the equipment wasn't nearly as great as it is now, and nor were they as fit athletically as the players are nowadays because of coming up earlier and younger and training and having the benefit of working out properly and proper diets and things of that nature. A lot of those guys in the past, they had to work regular jobs during the off season and such. But and their sticks, they didn't even have curves on their blades and things. So it could go both ways for me. I definitely agree with what you're saying, and you're right. So in one aspect, if you take them into the modern, like Gretzky always said that himself, and one of the reasons why he retired was he was saying that the guys are getting so much bigger and the game's getting faster nowadays. So I guess that's kind of like the evolution of sports is the guys in the past, with different rules. I mean, goalies played without masks for crying out loud. So Mike and Gary, I don't know how you guys could fathom that being our top goaltenders in the LIQ, but
yeah, yeah. I think also that the goals were not as, I don't know, like you're right. The sticks didn't have curves. They were made of wood. Guys weren't as strong back then. So I'm not saying it wasn't a dangerous position, but there was a lot less chance of getting seriously injured because guys didn't shoot high as often and they didn't shoot nearly as hard and fast. So I think, it wasn't as necessary back then as it is now.
Fair enough.
It makes sense that, by the time the goalie started, putting their masks on, it was right around the time Bernie Jeffrey started using the slap shot. So it sort of makes sense that those two things came around at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to get hit with one of those.
No.
Exactly. So, Mike, is that about it for your hat trick of guys or so?
That's kind of the biggest criticism I can get. It's like I'm looking at the list right now, and I mean, I will admit that there are some I've heard of all these names, but if you were to show me a picture of a young Toe Blake, for example, I'm not sure I would know who that is.
Yeah.
Like, I would be able to recognize, oh, that's Toe Blake. Like, you show me a picture of John Beliveau or Rocket Richard, like, oh, yeah, that's Rocket Richard. He's a different kind of player, a different kind of level. But if you show me a young Toe Blake, I don't know, I'm just going to see a somewhat diminutive Canadian guy.
I don't know, Mike. I'm looking at the list right now. And I've never heard of Charlie Conachet, Yvonne Cornoyer.
I have heard of Yvonne Cornoyer.
Yeah,
he was big.
I get your point, but I think a lot of these early guys,
right.
maybe
I mean, some of these guys from the 30s, it's just like, I guess you have to.
Yeah, I mean, just based solely on their statistics, and I guess the only way you can judge them is by how much better they were than their contemporaries, right? They're, how they fared in the era that they played in, because you can't be objective, because in so many ways it's a completely different game now than it was then.
Oh, yeah.
So, Brad, how about yourself? Who do you think is on there and who deserves to be on there or who does not deserve to be on the 100 list?
Oh boy, do I have some I think that shouldn't be on there.
Go for it.
I agree with Mike with Jonathan Taves. I don't see it yet. I think he's on his way, but I think we can't think of his potential to be on this list. You have to think of how he is now. Same goes for Duncan Keith. Great defenseman in the league right now. Not top 100 of all time. There are a couple more defensemen that could have taken his spot on this list. The two, and also Pavel Datsyuk falls under that category as well. I just don't think he had enough of a body of work. I don't think he should be on this list, but that's going to be. Well, there's a couple people that I think that should be on. Yes, but I think in his time, but compared to some of the other players that could have been on this list. And I guess I can get to them in a second, but the two picks that I think people will find a little controversial that I don't think should be on here are Grant Fuhr and Joe Nieuwendyk.
Really?
Yes. Now, I will give you my reasoning.
Sure.
Please.
Grant Fuhr, he got all his statistics playing on incredibly good teams. You could have put a garbage can in goal for the Oilers and they still would have won those cups.
Okay.
I mean, if you look, he has, on the statistics, he has the worst goals against average of any goalie on this list. So he averaged 3.5 goals per game against him. And while he was on the Oilers, he was up over 4. So,
wow.
And then when he moved on to St. Louis, his numbers got better, but he was also playing behind Al MacInnis and Chris Pronger as their top pairing. So I feel like he was a product not so much of his talent, but rather a product of the teams that he was on, which is not to say he wasn't a great goalie. He was a great goalie, but I don't think he's a legendary top 100 goalie of all time. Only 15 made this list, and I don't think I can argue Grant Fuhr is a top 15 goalie of all time.
No, I appreciate the logic, and I agree with it. And, Gary and Mike, you guys being the goaltenders, I think you got to follow Brad's lead, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm not really the one to ask. That I didn't see him play. He had to be. Look, in goal, you have to be elite to, stop the puck. We're talking about the elite among the elite. So, while I agree with what Brad's saying in terms of you have to, a garbage can could have won those games. The fact of the matter is that they could have won games, 9-8, or they could have won games, 9-1 or 9-3, and it still takes a pretty high level goalie to deliver in those high pressure situations. They won so many cups. You know, when it mattered in the clutch, he was still he delivered when it counts. I mean, and there's a lot of people who crack under that kind of pressure. So the fact that he was their top goalie through their run, you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm just rambling, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm not saying it's a bad point, Brad, but I'm saying I don't have any issue with him being on the list just because of his goals against average.
Well, I think we can all... Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead, Brad.
Well, I also think that part of my rationale was some of the goalies that were left off of the list that could have been on in his place. So
That's
names like Ed Belfour didn't make the list. Rogi Vachon didn't make the list.
That's a real travesty.
And then some more modern guys. Honestly, I think Roberto Luongo could have been on this list over Grant Fuhr. I also think Henrik Lundqvist arguably could be on this list.
I agree with you there.
And
I actually was surprised that Lundqvist was not on this list. I thought he would be.
And
I was really, when I read through the list, I was shocked he was not there.
Exactly. I kept looking for his name like I went past it. But speaking of which, your guy, Mike, the stalwart goalie in L.A., I'm kind of surprised that he didn't get the nod too. So going along with Brad, what he's saying there, you know, Jonathan Quick has had a pretty sensational career so far. But is that like what I think we all agree too with guys like Taze, Kane, and Keith. And again, what I was going to say before is winning the Stanley Cup more than once is going to obviously be the key to get you on this top 100 list. Can't really argue with that, but fast forwarding to that, individual efforts and careers that, you know, Quick, he's got 2 and still going strong. So,
well, not this season. He's played one period.
Caught up with him a little bit, but
I thought Lundqvist would make the list, and I didn't expect Jonathan Quick to make the list just because the Kings are the Kings, and Lodge being like the writers that follow the team, that because they play on the West Coast and because the vast majority of their games start at 10:30, you know, or 9:30 on, depending on if they've traveled into a Central Time Zone or Mountain Time Zone game team, that the bulk of the East Coast media doesn't really watch them. Doesn't really watch the highlights. So, like, that's why last year, I think it was a big surprise that Drew Doughty won the Norris and Andrei Kopitar won the Selke, because the logic was always like, oh, well, you know, you have these Kings players that do really well, but because the writers for the Bruins and the Canadiens and the Red Wings are in bed by the time the second period starts, they don't see some of the heroics and the theatrics that these players put on. So I wasn't totally surprised that Quick wasn't on there. I think you can make an excellent argument, though. 2 Stanley Cups. In the first cup, a member of perhaps the most dominant playoff championship team we've seen turn of the century. I mean, 2000, not 1900. Yeah. But right,
they lost like what, 2 or 3 games the whole postseason.
They lost 4 games and only 1 on the road. And his goals against and his save percentage were insane. And having watched every single one of those games of that playoff run that I could, because if I remember correctly, I don't think they broadcast the first round on the East Coast. So I had to watch it the next day in the condensed whatever it was. He was just otherworldly, right? So wins the cup, wins the Conn Smythe for that run. He was clearly the most important and most necessary part of that team to win. Goes to the conference finals the next year with a banged up team. Oh, I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but after they lost to the Blackhawks, the team was just, the injury report was like reading the Battle of Gettysburg. It was like, what the hell happened here?
But yeah, exactly. That's exactly what Brad is saying with Fuhr. Like, he didn't really have to face that, bringing a team on his back like that.
Right.
And Eddie Eagle too. I can't believe that great point. I can't believe that Belfour's not on the list too. So exactly. Yeah. I mean, Quick he's a young guy and having that much pressure on you to perform that at that level. And the same thing with Lundqvist too. I mean, Gary and I see that day in and day out. So they're kind of unsung heroes, goalies, I feel. And I don't think that they get enough credit for all that they do and keeping teams in games and so on and so forth. So,
well, I mean, James, if you look at the list, I don't think any current players that were put on the list, I don't think any of them were goalies.
Right.
Because honestly, goals are sexy, and I think it's a lot easier to point to somebody who's currently playing and saying, "Hey, this guy has a lot of talent," because he's flashy and he's always putting up highlights. Whereas with the goalies, I think it's a lot more of a numbers game over the course of the career, and goalies make flashy saves sometimes, but I think a lot of goalies make flashy saves once in a while. So, and honestly, I'm going to be the probably counterintuitively among all of us. I'm going to be the one who says I'm not surprised Lundqvist didn't make the list. I think he's incredibly talented, but he does have every season he consistently has long stretches where he's just mediocre. He's average, which is fine, but it's not, the superstar quality that we think of when we think Hall of Famer, all-time great. And that's fine. That's fine. Everyone goes through bad stretches, but I think it hurts him. And the biggest thing is he doesn't have a cup, so to point at somebody and say you are one of the greatest of all time before your career is even over, we say that definitively about you. I think the fact that he doesn't have a cup really hurts him.
Well, there are guys on here that don't have cups.
No, I know, but I'm saying as a goalie, in the middle of his career, I think given the points I've already made about how goalies are evaluated, I think that's, he doesn't have enough for you to really point to and say that right now, while he's playing, he's one of the greatest of all time.
And Mike, you said there's some guys on here without cups, but looking at the list, as far as the goalies go, only one goalie who did not win a cup made the list, and that was Tony Esposito.
Yeah, and now that I think about it, I would probably take him off.
Espo?
I know he was groundbreaking. But honestly, have you watched some of his highlights? And by highlights, I mean
it's hard
some
to
of the
argue.
things he did that were called saves.
It's hard to argue more than 400 wins, though.
Well, yeah, but I mean, let's see. He played from 1968 to 9. All right, so I mean, 400 wins in that span is pretty good. But
I mean, I will say, other than Grant Fuhr, Billy Smith, and George Vezina, he's got the highest goals against average. So that might be an argument against him, but I would put him middle of the road as far as the goalies go.
Who would be below him?
The list that I have here, because I went ahead and did this by position because I'm crazy.
And not surprising.
Below Espo, I've got Turk Broda, Bill Durnan. Now, I never saw these guys play, so this is based on statistics. Johnny Bauer, Bernie Parent, George Vezina, Billy Smith, and Grant Fuhr. What a lot of people
don't to put Billy Smith above Esposito.
I knew you were going to say that. A lot of people don't realize with Billy Smith is that he was a pretty crappy regular season goaltender. And through most of his career, the Islanders split him with Chico Resch in goal. But they would play him throughout the whole playoffs because he was an excellent clutch goaltender, similar to Bernie Parent, but Bernie was a better regular season goalie than Billy. But Billy Smith was not the best regular season goaltender. So that's why I would hold him back. As great as his playoff resume is, and as much of an Islander fan as I am, I don't think he would be up as high as people like Glenn Hall and Terry Sawchuk and Dominic Hasek.
The way I always look at goaltenders is that if tomorrow aliens came down and challenged us to the hockey version of Space Jam, and they said you could have any goaltender you want in their prime on your team. So you have that door up, you have that option available to you, right? The door's open, so you can pick anyone. So, I mean, I guess obviously the logical choice is, hey, let's take Hasek, in the 99 season or 98 season when he was just borderline unstoppable. But
I would throw a different name up there. I would say Ken Dryden in his prime.
Ooh.
I wouldn't. I think Ken Dryden has it. Don't get me wrong. I really like Ken Dryden, and I think he was a very good goaltender. But I think he had the benefit of playing behind one of the greatest teams of all time in the 70s, mid-70s, the whole 70s decade, Canadiens. I mean,
second lowest goals against average on this list.
And he
Right,
did
but
stand
look
on
at
his
who
head
he's
in what,
playing with.
71 when he was a rookie.
I mean, he did. Yeah, I mean, he did basically kick Rogie Vachon out of Montreal. So, I mean, not that I'm saying I would say, hey, I'll take Ken Dryden over whatever. I mean, he's obviously a supreme goaltender. I mean, Hall of Famer, obviously, and I think he deserves to be on the list. So I'm not saying, hey, take Ken Dryden off.
Oh no,
But I
Dryden's
think
on the list for sure.
Oh, he belongs. Yeah, he belongs. But I mean, he's one of those guys where, as excellent as he was, I do wonder how he would fare behind a weaker team than he was on. And I think if you've read the game, I think he kind of hints that he thinks the same thing, because he specifically talks about the New Year's Eve game against the Soviets, where the Canadians are peppering Vladislav Tretiak with shots, and he's like holding them off. And I think Dryden gives up 3 goals on 10 shots.
Yeah.
And Tretiak gives up 3 goals on like 40 shots or something. I remember the disparity, because he talks at length about it. The disparity is fairly large, and he felt very inadequate compared to Tretiak in that game. So I mean, I wonder if it's kind of that argument where you say, hey, if you take Ken Dryden in his prime, and I know he's great, but you put him on, I mean, I don't know who's the last place team in the early 70s, probably the Kings or, the Golden Seals. Yeah, put Ken Dryden on the Golden Seals, the 1970 Golden Seals. I mean, how's he going to look? The fact that he's playing behind Beliveau, Lafleur, Yvan Corneille, I mean, all these names.
I think he still would have produced. I think
he's
probably
still produced,
probably
not
not
the level
what he
we
did.
know him. No, yeah,
He
absolutely.
probably would have had a similar career to someone like Glenn Hall, who played on a pretty crappy Blues team through most of his career, and the Blackhawks.
Right.
And again, this is just like what you were saying about Fuhr, and I'm going to throw out Marty Brodeur, too, into a certain extent.
I was actually just going to bring that up, James. I was going to say, can I open the can of worms that is Marty Brodeur?
Go for it, G-Mac.
I mean, talk about benefiting from a system. He played behind that trap, and he stopped a lot of shots, but how high quality were those shots? I mean, the Devils, you could not break into their zone. So the fact of the matter is, you have to be a skilled goaltender to play in the NHL. This is, I mean, I guess this is counter to the point I was making about Grand Fjord before. In a way, I'm contradicting myself, and maybe that's partially because I just detest Marty Brodeur. But nevertheless, that, admitting that and setting that to the side, the fact of the matter is that, it's not like he stood on his head against this run and gun offense night in and night out. He played consistently, but he played consistently against some, pretty safe shots. So he just did the job. He didn't, have to, again, stand on his head.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. But I think that's a pitfall you fall into almost all goaltender arguments, where if you have a really great goaltender, then they're always going to say, well, look at the system you play by. That's what people say about sometimes about Jonathan Quick. Oh, well, look, he's playing behind the Kings. But, as someone who watches the Kings night in and night out, sometimes they have all that possession, but then they give up these incredibly good for the other team, incredibly bad for the Kings, scoring chances.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think though there's a reason why the trap, became so infamous for being such a boring kind of effective but boring method of play, because there's a difference between playing behind a really solid defensive team and playing behind a team who's built around a defense that's nigh impenetrable. Again, just one man's opinion, but I think that, I don't know that Marty Brodeur is ranked quite as high as he is if the Devils don't employ that trap system for how many years.
Yeah, and 2 things. Sorry, Sue, if you're listening. We apologize. You're still
sorry,
Superfan Sue, and we love you. But the whole point of this conversation is just this. We're splitting hairs here. So we're just giving our own opinions, and maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong. But I think between the 4 of us, especially with Brad doing an excellent job of his homework, and Mike and Gary, who know an awful lot about keeping goal, we can back it up to a certain extent, but especially from being fans, like, Mike being such a great Kings fan living on the East Coast, that's saying a lot more than somebody over in LA because it's easy to watch the games over there. So just keep that in mind. And again, all fans listening out there, we'd love to hear your 2 cents as well, because it's just as important as ours. But
absolutely.
On,
I was just going to say, if you have a differing opinion and you think we've really dropped the ball on something, please let us know. Hit the Deck Pod on Twitter or email us at hitthedeck@gmail.com or drop a comment on our Facebook page, please.
So, Brad, anybody else out there that kind of stuck out in your mind that did not belong on the top 100?
Joe Nieuwendyk was the other one. Why I think Joe Nieuwendyk shouldn't be on there is because I don't think he was ever the best player on the team he was on. I never feared Joe Nieuwendyk when he was out there. And if you look at his stats, he has pretty equal stats to some people that were left off this list. And Doug Gilmour is the one that pops into my mind that should have been on this list.
I got him on my list too, there, yeah.
Yep. And same goes for Dale Hawerchuk. Scored a lot more points than Nieuwendyk did in fewer games. But if you think about it, Nieuwendyk was never the star. He was in Calgary. He was overshadowed by Gilmour and Theo Fleury and Al McInnes and Mike Vernon.
Exactly. Yep.
Then he moved on to Dallas, where he was overshadowed by Mike Modano, Brett Hull, Eddie Belfour. Then he moved on to Jersey, and then there was Marty Brodeur there and Scott Stevens. He was never the guy that you worried about on the ice. He was just sort of there. He was a great leader, for sure.
Sure.
But I feel like if the NHL wanted to go with flash, like they did on this list, then I think you cannot leave a guy like Jerome McGinley off this list and put Joe Nieuwendyk on. You can't leave a guy like Dale Hawerchuk off this list but put Joe Nieuwendyk on. So that's my opinion. What do you guys think?
I agree.
Yeah, definitely. It's I have my list too, but I agree about Gilmour completely. And for guys that I don't think should be on the list, I completely agree with the both of you guys, and I think Gary as well, with Kane, Keith, and Taze. Now, yeah, they're great young players, and winning 3 cups in 6 years is insanely impressive, especially this day and age, 2010, 13, and 15. But again, I mean, they have a lot more hockey, hopefully, for them to play, and we'll see what happens, because out of the 100 years proper of the NHL, that's saying a lot, taking up those 3 spots from players who probably needed to be on there instead. So, yeah, great point about Nieuwendyk and Fuhr, and that's, again, the reason for this conversation and this podcast is just for that, for fans to dissect it a little bit more. So I agree with you 100% on those points there, right? So thank you for that.
No problem.
Question.
Yes.
And I don't have him on a specific spot. I don't know who I would bump out. Oh, I would probably take out Duncan Keith in his place. But I just wanted to kind of hear everyone's opinion, because I think that you can make a pretty interesting or compelling argument. Zdeno Chara, top 100 guy?
Yeah, I was surprised Chara got left off this list.
Border, like, kind of in his prime, essentially the Deion Sanders of hockey, where you just did not send it in his area.
Well, as a matter of fact, for my 2 cents of this whole thing, Chris Pronger belongs on the list, but to flip-flop, I would have put Chara over Pronger, but I think the difference maker was Pronger, was cup winner as well, but so was Chara. But I think Pronger had about 100 more points overall than Chara did. But I agree with you 100% on that one, Mike. That's one of my guys too. I was surprised that Big Z wasn't on the list.
Well, if it's not a Blackhawks player or Crosby or Ovechkin, you can just get the hell out.
Yeah. Brad, what you going to say something about that?
Yeah, I agree with you about Chara, that he is definitely a borderline case. I think Chara's problem is he doesn't have the stats to back him up, and really this list didn't appreciate defensive defensemen, which is sad because there are a lot of them out there. They more went for the guys who produce points. They did give Eddie Shore his spot. They gave Doug Harvey a spot on here, but they didn't really go for the defensive defensemen. So I can see sort of why they left guys like Zdeno Chara off. A guy like Rob Blake is someone else that could come up into this conversation who
I think he absolutely should be on.
He should be on this list. I think as far as defensemen go, the big guy they left off was Larry Murphy, because he's got just a terrible reputation in Toronto, but he killed it everywhere else he was. I mean, the guy played 1,600 games and scored over 1,200 points as a defenseman, plus he had 4 cups. Yet he's left off this list for someone like Duncan Keith to get on it.
Yeah, can't argue with that.
It's just exactly what Gary was saying before. It's like in baseball, chicks dig home runs. In hockey, they like the see that lamp being lit up. So it's kind of a double standard against goalies and, yeah, exactly, defensemen. So we appreciate that, Brad. Thank you.
The long ball, James. Chicks dig the long ball.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry.
Which is funny because Jonathan Toews is likely on this list more for his defensive ability than his offensive ability, I would think.
It's for his stalwart leadership, Brad. Come on, you know that.
Oh, sure.
Because he's the greatest leader hockey has ever produced, ever.
They might as well rename the Messier Trophy the Toews Trophy.
Right.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Toews maybe made the list just because he's somebody who, has always been kind of mentioned as one of the young, talented players that's, I don't know. I feel like he made the list because he's supposed to make the list. I don't know if I'm articulating this properly, but it seems, I don't know, maybe it's more hype than actual production. But it seems like Toews is always one of the big names that gets mentioned.
Well, I think statistically, he's like the past 2 years, he's actually been kind of trending in a somewhat downwards direction. I know last year he had a fairly down year. I don't really know how he's doing this year because I don't care to keep track on them very much, but I don't think he's really tearing it up.
Nah. And I mean, comparatively, he's easily got the worst stats on this list of centers that I've got that wasn't playing in, the non-second assist era. The guys that played in the single assist era obviously have fewer points, but Toews is just... Here's a name that could have taken Toews off if they wanted to put a flashy, sexy, modern name on there. How about Evgeny Malkin?
Yeah. I think he's always looked at as kind of like, well, he's great because, the Penguins have Crosby, so Crosby always gets the top competition, which means that they get to unleash Malkin on an inferior line. He always gets a favorable matchup because the idea is, all right, well, Crosby's going to take the top defenseman pairing, and he's going to take, ideally, the best line. So if you can get a mismatch, which I think they try and... It seems like that's something they would try to do all the time, which is what everyone does all the time, but especially in their case, getting Malkin out there against their third or fourth line, it's like, all right, well, there's a goal.
I feel like Malkin is kind of Jágr to Crosby's Lemieux. I don't know if Jágr makes this list if he doesn't have the kind of longevity that he's managed to have. And obviously he's a very skilled player, but he's somebody that, as skilled as he was always kind of in Lemieux's shadow when they were both in their prime. So I think Malkin may be suffering from the same kind of, if not even stigma, but just, that kind of misfortune.
Yeah, because last year when he came back after being injured, then that just turned the Penguins into the Stanley Cup champions that they were. So good points there on Malkin, guys. So Gary, how about yourself? Are there any players on the list that you think should not be there in the top 100?
Well, let me just say right off the top. Well, actually, we're nowhere near the top. We're significantly far away from the top. But right off the top of what I'm about to say is I don't have nearly the hockey intelligence of Brad and Mike, and probably even yourself, James. I've said this before on the podcast. I'm first and foremost a Rangers fan, and while I am aware of other players, skill players in the league, I don't go out of my way to analyze other people's play, and certainly I don't have the kind of depth of knowledge of past players because it's just not my thing to go back and seek out old-time players and old-time games just for the sake of it. So I apologize that my opinion is not going to be nearly as informed. And so I guess I'm going to go with more of a comedy pick than anything else. There really is only one man who I definitively believe does not belong on this list. And that's going to be Dennis Potvin, because anyone who has ever watched or attended a Rangers home game can tell you why.
I'm glad that we're in separate areas, so we don't have to have Brad go after Gary.
No offense, Brad.
So that's cool. But okay, fair enough. I'll leave my opinions to the end too. But Brad, you did so much great work. I'd love to hear the rest of your lists in terms of like we've delved into goalies and defensemen, and you dipped your toe a little bit into the centers too. So if you have each position of guys that you have that you rank them by, we'd love to hear it.
All right, so maybe I'll give you like my top 5 for each position. I guess there'll be some overlap with what I said already, but
sure.
Yeah.
Let's start at center. Gretzky, Lemieux, Beliveau, who I already mentioned, and then I've got Marc Messier at number 4. And then I was kind of toying with 3 names here for the 5th spot: Stan Mikita, Brian Trottier, and just the classy old-time pick, Howie Morenz. I don't know enough about him other than his legends to put him, to order him on this list. So I would probably lean towards the very complete player that was Brian Trottier.
Absolutely,
and I'm an Islander fan,
Yeah.
so that'll kind of sway me in that direction too. But
I would
don't
put
think
Trottier over Morenz.
Yeah. I don't think Bossy scores as many goals as he does if he doesn't have Brian Trottier as his center. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair.
Can't argue with that, yeah.
So moving on to the wing, Gordie Howe at number 1, Maurice Richard, Mike Bossy, Jaromir Jagr, mentioned all those guys already. At number 5, I think this guy would be a top 5 player of all time in the NHL if he played his whole career in the NHL, which is Bobby Hull. He spent a lot of years in the WHA that he probably could have racked up another 150 goals or so in the NHL during the 70s. But he spent a couple years over, in the WHA playing for Winnipeg. So I would put him at number 5. And then you got a whole slew of guys who could have, snuck up near that, into the top 10. So you got Guy Lafleur and Brett Hull and Teemu Selanne, Bernie Geoffrion, Johnny Busick. Even someone as Alex Ovechkin, I think in a couple of years is going to be creeping up this list pretty far.
Okay.
Especially given that he's scoring all these goals in an era where goals are kind of hard to come by.
Listening to your wings choice, I cannot help but see that you're omitting one, in my opinion, fairly obvious name.
Luc Robitaille?
Highest scoring left winger in NHL history? Just a possibility that he should be up there, right?
I know. I've got him on here, but I've got him about middle of the pack. I've got him near Jari Kurri. He is above Ovechkin, so I believe he's still the top left wing on this list. It just so happens all these guys ahead of him were right wings.
Well, yeah, that's fair. I didn't know if you were originally doing just right wingers.
Yeah.
Because it sounded like the first 5 were all right wingers, I think, or first 4 were all right wingers.
I think
couldn't
I've got
quite.
like my first 7 are right wingers or so.
All right, so if you're gonna, okay. I see how you broke it down, but yeah, that's fair because it does seem like right wingers tend to score more.
Yeah, I think they have the advantage coming out of the corner as a left-handed right winger would. I know that's how Maurice Richard scored most of his goals, was coming out of that corner and kind of pulling the NHL '94 move. Across the goal.
It never fails. It almost never fails.
Oh, that was my favorite move.
We're gonna. I know this is totally unrelated to the podcast, but I'll throw it out there anyway. But Gary and James, I'm going to have to, and Brad, of course, and whoever else, I'm going to have you all come up one day, and we're going to have some kind of NHL 94 tournament.
All right.
Sounds great.
Sounds like a plan.
I'm down. Which system?
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Genesis or Super Nintendo?
Genesis.
All right.
Okay, cool. I'm a Genesis guy, too. So.
Fair enough.
We just got to get one of those good controllers, the second one there, Mike.
Don't worry. You
got a handicap controller.
I got 2 good controllers. I got that, and I got a hidden gem. Let me tell you, boys, this is a real masterpiece. LaRussa Baseball 95. Excellent.
Blast from the past.
Yeah.
Ask Brad. He played it. We both played it together. Our hearts were in our throats. The tension, it was real.
Great job, guys.
Yeah.
Great job.
I can't wait.
Thank you, Mike. So, Brad, does that close out your
Let me just go quick through the defenseman and goalie. Defenseman, I had Bobby Orr, Ray Bourque, Eddie Shore, Doug Harvey, Nick Lidstrom, Dennis Potvin, Larry Robinson, Al McInnes. So those are all the guys who are up near the top. Chris Chelios.
Sure, yeah.
And in goal, this was probably the toughest one because it's just I had Patrick Waugh number 1, Waugh, Brodeur, Plant, Dryden, Hasek, Sawchuk, Hall.
Okay. Wait. That's your order?
Yeah.
No way. No way.
Here we go.
No way.
Gary and Mike?
I'll let Mike take this one.
All right.
Here comes
There's
the
no
argument.
way Hasek is that low.
You don't think Hasek should be? I mean, he's top 5.
He should be 1.
I find it hard to argue against Patrick Waugh.
How? Okay, let's hash this one out. All right.
All right. So, as far as I'm concerned, the top 5 goaltenders of all time are kind of set, and you just got to fiddle them around. So you got Brodeur, Waugh, Jacques Plante, Ken Dryden, and Dominic Hasek. Those are your 5. Do you agree or disagree? Okay.
I agree. I'm trying to think if I would put anyone else in above any of those guys. Are we doing just NHL?
Yeah, we'll stick with the NHL, yeah.
If we're doing just
of all time, I would have to say Tretiak.
Vladislav Tretiak.
Yeah, sure.
But if we're just doing NHL guys, then yes, I would say that's the top 5. It's just how you order them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
cool.
We could probably argue all day over that.
Sure, absolutely.
It's a great argument.
Yeah.
I would go Hasek, Plante, Waugh, Brodeur, Dryden.
Okay.
Because if you look at some of the stuff Jacques Plante did, it really was so forward thinking. I really, if you take a lot of the old time guys, and it's that same, the DeLorean argument, you bring them and they just can't comprehend the fast game. But I think like Jacques Plante's one of those few guys that if you went back and you brought him today and you're like, okay, Jacques Plante, Carey Price is hurt you, so you're the goalie today. I think he would be damn fine. Like, I think he would be just okay. I mean, I get that he would probably have to adjust a little bit to the speed of the game and whatnot, but I mean, I really think he was one of those guys that was just, he would be excellent whenever he played. As opposed to a great scorer who would probably be lit up like a scarecrow doused in gasoline if he played today.
All right, guys, thank you so much. It was very insightful. You guys came prepared and you know your stuff, and I really enjoyed this segment. So thanks for thinking it up and joining us and making it so much fun.
Agreed. Thank you, guys. We really appreciate it.
Do it.
Yeah.
Thanks for making us look smart.
Yeah. So, all right, guys, I have a couple of names that I'm going to throw in, but we could do that. If you guys want to go, you're more than welcome to go.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
No, I'm happy to talk hockey.
All right, cool. All right. So, yeah, and Gary, do you have anything else to add to your list and whatnot? Or
no, please, James, what do you got for us?
Just for my 2 cents for the final bow on this, if you will, I agree about the Chara being on or arguably being on. Maybe I wouldn't take Pronger off for him, but I thought those guys were kind of pound for pound on the same level. Pavel Bure, I have a question about. Now, it's very hard to argue with 50-plus goals in 5 of the 12 seasons that he played. But in terms, he was fast and this and that and the other thing. I'm not saying he doesn't necessarily belong on the best 100 hockey players of all time, but I could definitely see an argument for him not being on the top 100. Personally for me, and I wouldn't replace him with this player that I'm going to mention, but one of my favorite players growing up was Theo Fleury. We talked about him, Brad brought him up in the past on this podcast as well. He scored 18 or more goals. He scored 18 more goals than Bure did in his career and had 309 more points than Bure in 15 seasons that Fleury played. So that's kind of my 2 cents there for one of my favorite players growing up watching and somebody I still admire to this day. Again, I agree with you guys 100% about Kane, Keith, and Taves, the 3 Stanley Cup champion young Blackhawks. For favorite guys, again, growing up, being a Ranger fan, okay, yeah, Mike Richter and I'm stepping on Gary's toes here for this. I love the man. I'll go to my grave being grateful for him winning that Stanley Cup for us 23 years ago. Okay, now statistically fine. He has 300 wins, a little over 300 wins. I think he had to retire a little bit too early because of concussion reasons and having a cracked skull, for crying out loud. And his save percentage was above 900 too, which was pretty great in the time, but maybe now when you compare him to guys like Hasek and so on and so forth, maybe it doesn't hold water. But I got to definitely stick up for number 35 of my American Rhino and Mr. Richter over there in the blue shirts as well. On the other hand, there's his contemporary was Van Beesbrook, John Van Beesbrook, another great goalie, Ranger, 374 wins. Save percentage was just under 900, so okay, I see when you're talking about splitting hairs for the 100 greatest players, maybe not, but in my heart, he is. And obviously, we mentioned Lundqvist, too, 395 wins and counting, and a save percentage of 920, so it's just pretty darn great. To Brodeur's 912 save percentage, just to put a comparison there. Again, I totally agree with Brad about Doug Gilmour, over 1,400 points in his career. Another guy who's had the benefit of longevity, but not on the list, Joe Thornton, who's still going strong for the Sharks, having over 1,300 points, but he has played for a while, so maybe that's what held him back. And my last guy, for all you Dumb and Dumber fans out there, how can Seabass not be on the 100 greatest list of hockey players? The man played in 12 injury-plagued seasons, 50-plus goals in 3 of them, and Cam Neely, I don't care what anybody says, you're on my top 100 list. Thank you very much. So that ends it for me.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
I was going to actually, I'm glad you did, even though I really do not care for the gentleman. But I was going to bring up that I guess you could say that Joe Thornton probably should be on this list.
Yeah.
I mean, he's getting up there. I think he's only got, if I remember correctly, I think he only has 3 goals this season. I think they're all empty netters.
They are all empty netters.
So he's not exactly lighting it up. But, I mean, I'm just looking right here. I mean, I don't know if these are up to the minute updated, but he's 25th all-time in points and 13th all-time in assists.
Yeah.
So, and he's, for what it's worth, he's the Sharks' all-time leader. Now, we're talking about a team that's only 20 years old or so it really doesn't matter. You know, because if you're only 20 years old and the guy's been there for, 12 years, obviously he's going to be the all-time leader. So, put that aside. But, I mean, if you're talking about, 13th all-time in assists, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Let's get to that top 100 level. I would put him in over Kane. Because, I mean, what exactly has Kane really done that's...
Well, I would actually argue that Kane could be on this list. He's over a point per game in an era that it's hard to do that in. And I think you could argue someone like Pavel Bure, who didn't have some longevity in his career, could fall off this list. Or someone like, going back in history, someone like Max Bentley, who is, when they put the thing up online, it's like, oh, he's a 4-time goal-scoring leader, but he did all of that during World War II, when the league was decimated of some of its better players. So someone like that, and if you look at Bentley's stats, he has 544 career points. That's someone who might be able to drop off, and you would leave Kane on and still be able to put on some of the other people we've discussed. Because Joe Thornton is basically the modern Adam Oates, and Oates made this list.
Good. Very good analogy. That's nicely done, man. Wow, you brought your A game tonight, Brad.
What can I say? I watched a lot of hockey in the 90s, and I did a little of my homework on the guys from the 30s and the 40s before getting on here.
Surprise, surprise, Brad is good at something.
Brad always brings his A game when it comes to hockey.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, he does.
Gary and I have both been victimized enough to know that.
Hey, me too. I'm a stupid defenseman. I've been left flat-footed.
It's not the same for you. You know, Brad scores on me or Gary, and you're the defenseman and say, oh, shucks, I could have stopped him, but I'll get him next time. For us, it's like, oh, God damn it. Oh, he scored again. I can't do anything. I'm not doing it right. It's like a whole crisis of confidence that you run through in like 10 seconds.
Brad scored on me once in goal as an emergency goalie. I still haven't gotten over that.
Sorry about that one, Gary.
No, you earned it.
I will still say,
He earns every goal he gets. That's the one thing Brad does.
Amen to that. There you go.
I have played a lot of hockey in my time, and Gary, I apologize, but I think I scored my most impressive goal against you.
That's okay.
Which was from the corner behind the goal. I somehow put it top shelf. I don't know how I did it.
We talked about this on the podcast. I still don't know how that went in.
Oh, yeah, not to mention, you actually have used me to score. You've more than once caromed the puck off of my butt or my head or something, and then it went into the net. So, yeah, I know how you guys feel, Gary and Mike, to a certain extent. So, plus I have to stand there helplessly watching as he's doing damage to my goalie. So,
go ahead, Mike.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I got a call from a coworker yesterday, a listener, Anthony, who who plays in a deck hockey league on the island. And he said to me, "Hey, what's that site you use for cheap hockey sticks?" And I told him Hockeytron. He's like, "Yeah, I broke mine on the net the other night." I was like, "Oh, you know what happened? He's like, "You give up a goal?" He's like, "No, actually, I scored a goal. Unfortunately, it was a teammate of mine passing the puck back, and it deflected off of my stick up into our own net." So, yeah, these things happen.
That they do. I think there's a reason why there are all these videos of angry goaltenders, because when it happens, it's just, there's no other natural reaction. But I was going to say that I know that more than once Brad has used a particular move, and I always know it's coming at some point, and I'm always like, I'm going to stop it this time. I'm going to get him. You just wait and see. He's going to do that thing, and I'll be ready. And then he always does it. Where he waits, and he goes to the far side, and I'm trying to wait him out, and there's that little voice in the back of my head like, no, get down now. Do it. He's going to shoot. And I'm like, no, I try and wait. And finally, I'm like, all right, he can't shoot. He's like, practically perpendicular to the line, so there's no way he's going to make a shot that goes in. So I then drop down, and what should happen? But he makes the shot. And I always know it's going to happen, and I always try and wait that extra millisecond, and it never works. So hats off to you, Bradley, with your magical move that I know will happen. It's much like the NHL 94 move, actually.
Except he doesn't cross in front of you. He just...
He actually kind of does, now that I think about it, because he comes straight at me, and then he goes to the side. So I'm trying to kind of keep pace with him, but I'm trying to stay up, because I know he's going to... And this all happened, it's happening in like a second.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like it's happening, it's like the slowest moving play of all time, but it's all like that. That's hockey.
There you go.
You guys are making me blush over here.
Well, you deserve it. So we love you, and we have much respect for you because, like Mike said, it's well earned. So
yes.
And again, guys, thank you so much for rejoining us on Hit the Deck tonight. It was, I think, a great podcast.
Yes.
You guys did great, far and beyond what we expected, and I think the NHL should be proud of itself for getting its fans so excited and at least starting a conversation about the 100 greatest NHL players of all time. So well done, boys, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, James.
All right, gents, you are free to go.
Yes,
all right.
You are released.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Indeed.
It was a lot of fun.
You.
All right,
yeah. It really was.
Last minute remaining in the podcast.
Thank you, Pops. Oh, well, it has been quite a show. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you enjoyed listening to all of our various opinions, both informed and wildly uninformed as they may have been. Please, as we mentioned during the show, feel free to give us your opinion at hitthedeck@gmail.com. Tweet at us at hitthedeckpod. Again, that deck is spelled DEK in all cases. Or hit us up on Facebook and start a conversation. You can start a conversation with Brad or Mike if you'd like. I'm sure they'd be happy to jump in as well. Speaking of, we want to thank Brad and Mike so very much for being guests on tonight's show. We, of course, would like to thank Pops for being the voice of the podcast, Anthony Sajazi for providing us with music used in the podcast, and the LIQ for sound effects. Thank you ever so much every week, every time for listening. We sincerely appreciate it. We would also appreciate it if you would subscribe to us, if you haven't already, on iTunes or Stitcher or any other place where you get your podcasts. We'd also, I know this is asking a lot, but the cherry on the top, could you please be so kind as to spread the good word? Spread the good word about the Hit the Deck podcast to your friends and your enemies alike. Anyone who you think might enjoy listening to this cavalcade of nonsense. We would, we'd just love to grow the fun, as it were. James, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, but I don't think we had enough American Rhino tonight, so thank you for everything, Mr. American Rhino.
If you're thanking me for not having enough American Rhino on the show tonight, you're perfectly welcome. I'm sure the listeners are thanking me as well.
No, that's not what I meant. That's not sorry.
They deserve it. They deserve a break from me.
I'll go in the box. I'll see you later.
Till
next time.
Like the jingle says, you deserve a break today, right? All right. Anyway, you know what you don't deserve a break from is the same gentle reminder that we always like to leave you with, and that is, if you're upset that your favorite player didn't make the top 100 greatest players of all time, if you're upset that you feel like you don't have the skill level of your average NHL player, or if you're just upset for some irrational reason and decide you'd like to take it out on someone else, I would urge you to remember, it's deck hockey. Don't be that guy. Thanks, everybody.
Screw it. Whatever.
Consider it screwed.
Fair enough.
Are we
As
being
long as
recorded?
it's-